So we were talking about bones. We just went over the ways to classify bones. We also talked about cartilages. Let's go ahead with bones though. So we all kind of know what bones look like, but let's talk about what they're made of. In other words, what's the composition of bones? And so if you look at this pie chart, you can get an idea of what bones are made out of. They're about 2/3 minerals. So 2/3 of the bone is going to be minerals, and most of that is calcium. Now, it's not the only thing. There's things like potassium and sodium and magnesium. There's a lot of carbonate, and then there's also phosphorus or phosphate. But about 2/3 of it is minerals. The other 1/3 is mostly collagen, but it's proteins, mostly collagen. So you need both of these things in order for the bone to perform the functions that it needs to perform. And if you remove either one of these, the bone's going to change. So let's look and see what happens if you take away either one of these. So remember, about 2/3 minerals and about 1/3 protein. And so the minerals are what's going to make the bone stiff and hard and all that. But bones are also a little bit flexible. You can bend a bone and it doesn't immediately break, and that's due to the proteins. So let's see what happens if we remove either one of these. Well, you can go to the grocery store, and you could do it yourself if you wanted to. Go to the grocery store and buy a bunch of, I don't know, let's say chicken thighs. And if you take in the chicken thighs and you scrape all the meat off, you're going to wind up with this nice little bone that looks something like this. This is the femur of the chicken leg. And you're going to get a bunch of those. And let's say you get 8 or 10 of them, and so you're going to have all these little bones. And you're going to, like I said, clean them up so there's no meat on them or anything like that. And then we're going to take these bones and we're going to do 2 different things with them. With some of these bones, we're going to soak them in vinegar. And so vinegar has acetic acid in it. And what the acetic acid is going to do is it's going to leach out or pull out all of the minerals. In other words, if you put it in a jar full of vinegar, what's going to happen to that bone is the calcium and the minerals are going to come out into the acid. And what you're going to be left with is just the protein part of it. And so when you take it out, it's going to look just like it did when you put it in, but it's going to be very, very, very rubbery. You can take and tie it up in a knot. You can do all kinds of things with it because it doesn't have any minerals. All it has is the proteins. And so if you don't have enough calcium, if you don't have enough minerals, this is what your bones are going to be like. They're going to be very, very rubbery. And when we talked about UV light, remember we talked about UV light and that you use it to make vitamin D. And vitamin D is necessary for you to absorb calcium from your diet. And so if you don't have enough vitamin D, you don't have enough calcium. And so when you build bones, the bones don't look like this. The bones look like this. And so remember, those kids had weird shaped legs. They bow out like this. And the reason why is because their body weight pushes down and the bones are flexible, they're rubbery, and they bend. And so if you don't have enough of this, these bones don't work the way they're supposed to, and they also become very misshapen. But if we go back and we take some of those bones, remember we had more, but instead of putting these bones in vinegar like we did, we're going to put this bone in the oven. You can use your own oven at home. So put it in there and you set it for about 250 degrees and you just leave it in there. You leave it in this oven for 250 degrees. It takes about 16 hours to 24 hours. So you have to leave it in there a long time. But what's going to happen is this heat is going to cause the protein to burn away. And so when you take it out of the oven, it's going to look just like you did when you put it in, but it doesn't have any protein in it. And if you just drop it on the counter just a few inches, this is what's going to happen to it. It's just going to shatter. That's because there's no protein holding the bone together. It's still hard, but it's very, very brittle. And this is what happens with age. As you get older and older, what happens is you lose the protein in the bones. You don't replace that collagen, you lose it. And so when you talk about very old people, their bones are very, very brittle. And so if an old person were to fall down the stairs, as they fall down the stairs, every bone that hits is going to shatter just like this. And so if you look at the way old bones break, they don't break cleanly. They do this, they shatter into a bunch of pieces. So Maria asked, is it true that milk helps bones? Well, remember, in order to make bones, we're going to have the calcium because they're 2/3 minerals. And so milk has a lot of calcium in it. And so as you ingest the calcium, you're ingesting the milk, and then you can use that calcium in order to build the bone. And so instead of your bones being rubbery like this, that calcium makes them hard and flex or rigid like this. So yes, drinking milk helps bones. Now, there are other ways to get calcium. You don't have to drink milk if you have something against it or you don't get. There's calcium in lots of different things. And then Margarita asked, why does weightlifting improve bone density? Well, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that a little bit later on. So let's just save that question and we'll come back to it in a little bit later. So, but this is what bone looks like. And so remember, it's 2/3 minerals, mostly calcium, and then it's 1/3 protein, mostly collagen. And then if you look at it, remember they have particular shapes. And so let's look at the structure of these bones. This is a long bone, and we're going to use a long bone to talk about the structure because long bones are the most common type of bone. We have more long bones than we do anything else. And so let's look at the structure of a long bone. So remember we said long bones are longer than they are wide. And we also said if you cut them open, they're hollow inside. There's a big hollow space that runs up and down. And you can see that over here. That's that medullary canal right there. And so if you do a cross section, you see that big hollow space like this. There's the medullary canal. But it's not in the entire bone. It's only in the middle part of the bone, this part. And this part of the bone is called the diaphysis. So here's the diaphysis from here to here. That's where that big hollow space is. But if you look at the ends of the bones, they're wider, they're expanded. And these ends of the bone, when you open them up, they don't have a big hollow space. What they have inside them is spongy bone. And so they have a different name. The ends of the bones are called epiphyses. So we have an epiphysis on each end. Well, to be able to differentiate them, we name one of them the proximal epiphysis. And remember, the word proximal means close to the origin or close to the trunk. And so this is the end that's closer. So right here is where your shoulder is. And then the other one is going to be the distal epiphysis. And distal, remember, means farther from or far from. And so it's farther from the trunk or the origin. And so that end right here is where your elbow is. And so this is the upper arm bone is what it is, and it's called the humerus, and we'll get to that also later on. It's the upper arm bone, and it's the humerus. So if we look inside it, it looks like this. So our diaphysis is hollow. And look what we have. We have dense bone out here. And then we have this medullary canal in the middle. And then if we look at the two epiphyses, what we see is dense bone on the surface. And then we see spongy bone in the middle. Another thing we see with all long bones is that the end of every long bone is covered in cartilage. That's hyaline cartilage. And because it's part of the joint, it's called articular cartilage, but it's hyaline cartilage. And hyaline cartilage is very, very smooth. Remember, it's also very, very resistant to wear. And so you can't wear it down, or at least it's very hard to wear down. And so it keeps the bones from rubbing against each other, because both bones, both ends, are covered in cartilage. And so it's cartilage that rubs against cartilage. But cartilage is very resistant to wear. Another thing about bones is they have a membrane around them. So here's a membrane right here. And it goes everywhere. There's the membrane, and there's the membrane. It's everywhere except the cartilage. So it stops right there. There's no membrane over the cartilage. That's a different membrane. But this is around bone. It's called periosteum. And we're going to look at the periosteum here in a minute. So when we look at a long bone, we see all these different things. So let's talk about them. So the middle part, again, is called the diaphysis. Sometimes it's called the shaft. But it's compact bone, and it has this medullary canal in the middle. And the medullary canal is a hollow space, so we can put stuff in there. Well, in children, what you find in here is red bone marrow. And red bone marrow is where we make blood cells. But as you get older, by the time you hit your 20s, most of this red bone marrow is gone, and it's been replaced with fat. And this is called yellow bone marrow. So everybody in this class, when you look at most of your long bones, they're going to have yellow bone marrow in them. Again, if we look at it, we can see it here when it's cut long ways. We can see those different parts. Now this bone is the femur. This is the bone of the thigh. But look, there's our diaphysis. Here's an epiphysis. That's our proximal epiphysis, because that's where the hip is. And then here's our distal epiphysis. That's where the knee is. And then you can see the dense bone, compact bone. There's the medullary cavity or medullary canal. If you cut it crossways, so this is a transverse section, there's the medullary canal. And again, this is where the marrow would be. But look, that's dense bone. And we're going to talk more about dense bone later on. If you look at the epiphyses, remember they're wider, they're expanded. And we have a thin layer of dense bone with spongy bone on the middle. And so when you look at them, there's the spongy bone right there. That's spongy bone. But it's not on the surface. It's covered up with a thin layer of dense bone. Same thing here. Here's the spongy bone, but it's covered up with a thin layer of dense bone. But look, spongy bone has not one big hollow space, but lots and lots and lots of tiny little hollow spaces. And in these little hollow spaces, we also have marrow. And again, it can be red bone marrow or yellow bone marrow. And you can see that here as well. If you blow that up, you can see what the spongy bone looks like, and you can see those spaces, and those spaces are where that marrow would be. And then remember, there's a thin layer of dense bone, and then here's that cartilage we were talking about, that articular cartilage. We also, though, remember, have membranes around the bone. And so if you look at around the bone here, that's a membrane. Here, that's a membrane. And if you blow it up and look at it, it looks like this. That's what the membrane looks like. But there's also a membrane on the inside, right here. Right here, this thin layer right here. That's on the inside. And so when we look at these membranes, they're either the periosteum, peri means around, so this is on the outside, or the endosteum, and endo means inside. So if you look at the periosteum, it's this one. So this is the periosteum out here. And look, they've peeled it away so you could see what it looks like. It's held in place. It's attached to the bone. And then here's the endosteum right here. It lines the medullary canal. It also lines the spongy bone. And so let's look at these two layers. Let's look at the periosteum first. So here's a model that we're going to see when we do lab. And so here's dense bone right here. But here's the membrane right here. And what they've done is they've pulled it away so you can see these little fibers. And so inside this periosteum, we're going to find things like nerves, and we're going to find blood vessels. And then here are those little fibers. They're called perforating or Sharpie's fibers. So if we blow that up and look at it, we can see here. So here are those perforating or Sharpie's fibers. And then here's our periosteum. Well, look, the periosteum has two layers to it. It has two layers. If we go back to this other picture, even here you can see two layers. So there's a layer out here, but there's also a layer next to the bone right here. There's a layer out here, but there's also a layer next to the bone right here. Well, if you look at the outer layer, so Zoe says, does the periosteum serve the same function as perichondrium? Some of the same function. Yeah, we can say pretty much the same function. We'll get to it. But let's look at these two layers. So let's look at the outer one first. So if you look at the outer one, and if we go back to this other picture, now you can't see it. If you look at the outer one, it's actually very thick. It's called the fibrous layer. So here's that fibrous layer here. And the fibrous layer is made out of dense, irregular connective tissue. So remember, that's one of those fibers, and they run every which way. This is surrounding the bone. So if we go back to this other picture, here is that dense, thick outer layer. This is that fibrous layer. So the fibrous layer is strong. And so it provides an anchor for things like tendons and ligaments. It also protects the bone. And it's also how the blood vessels and nerves are going to get into, because they travel with this periosteum. Well, if we look here, here's the outer layer right here. And if we look here, here's the outer layer right here. If we look at it on a slide, you can still see two layers. There's a layer and there's a layer. So this is the outer one. Here's our bone down here. Here's muscle up there. But anyway, it's this layer right here. And this is dense, irregular. Look at all the fibers that are in it. You can see them. So it's very, very strong and thick and tough. Here's another picture. Here's bone over here. And here's the outside out here. So it's this layer that's facing the outside. It's this layer. That's the fibrous layer. Thick, tough, strong. But there's also an inner layer. And the inner layer is right next to the bone. So if you look at the inner layer, it's completely different. It doesn't have any fibers. What it does have are cells. So there are cells here. And the cells are of two different types. So one type we have are osteoblasts. Remember, a blast means it's a producing cell. So osteoblasts can produce bone. They build bone. In other words, we can make bone on this surface. So we can add more bone right here and make it bigger, and add more and make it bigger. So if this were our bone in cross section, here is that layer right here next to the bone, and it has these bone forming cells in it. So the layer is called the osteogenic layer. Osteogenic. Osteo means bone, and genic means to create or generate. So this layer can create bone. And so what's going to happen if I create bone, I'm going to add bone on the surface. And the bone is going to get bigger in diameter, and I'm going to add more bone, and it's going to get bigger in diameter. I'm going to add more bone. So I'm going to go from a bone this size to a bone this size because I've added all this extra bone on here. So if we look at that layer, it looks like this. So here's that fibrous layer right here. That's the outer layer. Here's bone. But here's the layer with the cells. And these are those cells that can build bone. They're osteoblasts. And so I can add more bone. I can add bone right here on top of the bone that's already been there. Add more bone. Add more bone. And so again, if we go from adding more bone, we go from this size, the outside's going to get even bigger. And so the bone is going to get thicker. It also is going to be stronger. But there's also another kind of cell in here. And these are called osteoclasts. And a clast cell is one that dissolves bone. It destroys bone. It's going to use acid, just like we talked about with the vinegar, and it's going to dissolve the bone away. And so if I dissolve the bone, what's going to happen is here's this layer again, right here, right next to the bone. But if I just start eating away at the bone is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I'm going to go from having something that looks like this to having something that looks like this, or even this. So the bone is going to get thinner. It's also going to get weaker because it's not as thick as it was. So this osteogenic layer has both types of cells. So I can build bone, but I can also destroy and remove bone. Come back to this picture. I can build bone, but I can also eat away the bone and remove the bone. Any questions about this? So 2 layers. Here's our fibrous layer. Again, it's thick. It's tough. It's strong. Provides an anchor for things like tendons and stuff like that. It also protects the bone. It's also where the blood vessels travel and the nerves to get to the bone. And then we have this layer. And again, this layer is where we have those osteoblasts. And so we can build bone. But we also have osteoclasts. And so we can also remove bone. Any questions? So here's what that looks like. So out here somewhere is the fibrous layer. So that's going to be out here. And again, it's thick, it's tough, it's protective, it's got all those fibers in it. But right next to the bone, we have this osteogenic layer. So there's this osteogenic layer. And there's 2 kinds of cells in it. Osteoblasts. Again, what do? Do you remember? They build bone. But we also have this much bigger cell. Look, it's eaten away. It's eaten that. It ate it. It destroyed it. Because they can also remove bone. So I can build and I can remove. I can get bigger, I can get smaller. But I can also, because I'm building some areas and removing others, I can change the shape of a bone. Because some areas get built up, some areas get removed. So I can change the shape. I can remodel the bone. So is that the process when you break a bone, or is this process happens involuntarily? It happens when you break a bone. That's what happens when you're healing. But it also happens all the time. It happens whether we want it to or not. So here are osteoblasts. So what do they do again? What do osteoblasts do? And so look, if I add bone right here, this is going to be now bone. So look, there's an extra layer of bone, and those are going to get pushed this way. And then I can add an extra layer, and they're going to get pushed this way. So I can have a thicker, thicker, thicker bone. And here's my osteoblasts out here, still laying down bone. But we also have these osteoclasts. So osteoclasts, much bigger cell, they're also multinucleated, but they destroy bone. They remove it. And so what's going to happen here is it's going to eat away at the bone. It's going to eat away, and I'm going to get a little pit forming. And then it's going to eat some more, and I'm going to get a pit forming. And so what I'm going to wind up with is bone that's way over here. And all of that extra bone has been removed. And here sits my osteoblast eating away at it again. So that's the periosteum. But we also have an endosteum. So remember, the endosteum is in here. Here's the endosteum. So you can see it, this very thin layer right here. It's a different color. Well, if you look at the endosteum, and you can see it over here too, it lines the hollow spaces in the bone. It's lining a medullary canal, and it's also wrapped around all the trabeculae. Well, our periosteum, remember, had two layers. There's one here and one here. But the endosteum only has one layer. And the layer it has is that osteogenic layer. So in other words, it's just like this part right here. That's also osteogenic. And remember, osteogenic has those two types of cells, osteoblasts and osteoclasts. And so if we do a cross section here, it's not on the outside, it's lining this medullary canal. It's right here. And so what this can do is it can build bone. And so if it builds bone, what's going to happen is I'm going to go from something that looks like this to something that looks like this. So look, I added bone right here. I added bone. And so the medullary canal got smaller. But I also have osteoclasts. So I can also go from something that looks like this to something that looks like this. So look what happened. That medullary canal got bigger because I ate away the bone. I removed the bone. And so because we have osteoblasts and osteoclasts on the inside and the outside, we can change the bone dramatically. So we could go from a bone that looks like this to a bone that looks like this. Bigger, but also with a bigger medullary canal. So how did I do that? I added on the outside, but look what I did. I removed on the inside. Which cells are responsible for adding? What? Osteoblasts. And which cells are responsible for removing? Osteoclasts. Does that make sense to everyone? So bones can change their shape dramatically. So again, here's our periosteum, two layers, and here's our endosteum, just one layer. And again, here's what that endosteum looks like, because it's this osteogenic layer. So there's our osteoblasts and there's our osteoclasts. So look at this. This is bone out here. And here is our endosteum right here. This is the endosteum. And so when we look at it, we see osteoblasts. And look, they built, and this thing went this way. It got bigger. But here are osteoclasts. And look what happens here. This is being eaten away, and it's going to get smaller. So Zoe says, where's the periosteum? You can't see it in this picture. It's on the outside. Remember, this is just on the inside. It's out here somewhere. But look, we've changed this shape very, very much. We built this. So look, that got longer. And then we ate that away, and that got smaller. And so if we add here and take away here, add here and take away here, we're going to change the shape. This is going to get bigger like this. And this is going to get sunk in like this. So we can dramatically change the shape of bones. Again, periosteum outside. So here's the periosteum. Endosteum inside. So here's the endosteum. So here's our bone. So outside 2 layers. Inside 1 layer. Does it make sense? Any questions? So if we go back to that model again, so here's bone, and here's the outside over here. But over here, it's on the inside. So if we turn it around and look at it, there's the inside right there. Remember, this has 2 layers out here, but this one only has 1 layer. And remember, it wraps itself around these trabeculae. That's what these are. And so trabeculae can get bigger and thicker, but they can also get smaller, just like this can. These things can get bigger and thicker, but they can also shrink and get smaller. This hole right here can get bigger, but the hole can also get smaller. The diameter can get bigger, but it can also get smaller. So if we do all of that, then this bone is going to look completely different when we're finished. Any questions? So that was a long bone. If we look at short bones, irregular bones, flat bones, they basically all look the same. So remember, a flat bone looks like this. It looks like a sandwich. And so what we have is dense bone out here on the outside, and then spongy bone in the middle. And so if you look at this, it looks similar or almost identical to the epiphysis of a long bone, because the epiphysis of a long bone looks like this. And if we look at a short bone, it looks almost the same. So here's the dense bone, and here's the spongy bone. And if we look at an irregular bone, it looks almost the same. And so just like with a long bone, we're going to have a periosteum out here. And again, just like with a long bone, it's got 2 layers to it. And then, just like with a long bone, on the inside, we're going to have the endosteum, and it's going to cover all of these surfaces on the inside. And so we can make them bigger, we can make them smaller. So that's what these bones look like. So we have a periosteum, and we have an endosteum. Any questions? So here's that flat bone. So here would be the membrane. What membrane would this be? What membrane would that be? No, this is dense bone. What membrane would that be? Would it be the periosteum or the endosteum? It would be the periosteum. And again, it's got 2 layers. But there's this membrane, which is around here. All of these things. It's like here on this and here on this. What membrane would this be? That would be the endosteum. Does that make sense? Any questions? No, Zoe, this is not a long bone. This is a flat bone. This is a flat bone. So flat bones, short bones, irregular bones, they're similar to the end of a long bone, the epiphysis. Because remember, the epiphysis looks like this. You have a little layer of dense bone, and then you have spongy bone in here. That's what we have here, a little layer of dense bone and then spongy bone in here. And so just like with the long bone, we have a periosteum out here, 2 layers, and an endosteum in here, 1 layer. It's the same here. There's a periosteum and an endosteum. Anybody else have a question? So let's look at these cells. We already talked about 2 of these cells. Osteoblasts, do you remember what they do? What do they do? Build bone. That's right. That's all they do. They build bone. And what do osteoclasts do? Oops. They destroy bone. That's right. But there's actually 2 other types of cells in bone. There's what are called osteogenic or osteoprogenitor cells, and then there's osteocytes. And so when you look at it, there's 4 types of cells. We already know about osteoblasts, so let's talk about those first. So here's an osteoblast right here. And if you look at them, They have a lot of rough endoplasmic reticulum, a lot of Golgi, a lot of mitochondria. That's because they're working hard. They're very active cells. And what they're doing is they're laying down bone. They're building bone. And it takes a lot of stuff to build bone. But look at this. These are these osteoblasts right here, and they build bone. But look what happened. This one was an osteoblast, and it built bone, and now there's bone around it. Look, there's bone all the way around it. You think there's any room for this particular cell to build bone? Is there any place to put it? Or this one, look, it's completely surrounded by bone. So is there any way it can build any more bone? Is there any place to put it? There's not. This one can put bone out here or put bone here and move that way. So can this one and this one, but these are trapped inside bone. They used to be osteoblasts, but now they're trapped. And what happens is these osteoblasts change, and they turn into what are called osteocytes. And osteocytes don't look like osteoblasts anymore. They look like this. So remember, an osteoblast looked like this. But that was while they were building bone. But then they're going to get trapped. They're going to be surrounded by bone. And once they're surrounded, there's no more room to build bone, and so they turn into an osteocyte. And osteocytes maintain bone. Well, look at them. They have these little arms, and they actually hold hands with each other. Here's what they look like, all these little arms. And you can see there's 2 osteocytes. There's one here, but there's also one right here. And look, they hold hands with each other. Right there's a connection between these. They're holding hands. And what they do is they pass materials from one cell to another. They look like this. So see, they're holding hands right here. They're holding hands. And the blood vessel is over here. So this is where the nutrients are. And so what they have to do is this cell is responsible for getting out the nutrients. And then it passes the nutrients along. Passes it to that cell. Passes it to that cell, and then this one uses some of the nutrients and then passes it to that cell, passes it to that cell. That's why they have these weird arm-like things. They're called cytoplasmic processes or cytoplasmic extensions. But a good way to think of them is just think of them like arms. And they can move materials through these extensions so that they can share with other cells. So if we go back, remember we had an osteoblast. The osteoblast is going to build the bone. So all of this bone was laid down by osteoblasts. But as they build the bone, some get trapped in the bone. And there's no room for them to build any more bone. They're trapped. They're surrounded by bone. And so once they're surrounded, they change from being this cell that looks like this to being the cell that has all these arms. And again, they're going to use these arms to pass materials from one cell to the next. And then we already know about another type of cell. We know about osteoclasts. So remember, these are the ones that destroy bone. They absorb it. They release these things like acids and enzymes, and they destroy the bone. And then all that material gets reabsorbed. Well, when you look at them, they look like this. And so look at this. This much of this bone, it's supposed to be like this, but look, all of that was eaten away. So we get this little indentation where it was eaten away. And if I keep eating it, it's going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. Look over here. What kind of cells are these? Anybody want to guess? These are those cells that are trapped in the bone. What are they? Osteo. What are they? Osteocytes. Because they're trapped in the bone. They look like this. Remember the little arms? And they're holding hands. You can see where they're holding hands and passing materials from cell to cell to cell. It's because they're trapped in the bone. And then there's one last type of bone cell. And these are stem cells. They're called osteogenic or osteoprogenitor cells. And they basically don't do anything until they turn into osteoblasts. So they're sort of reserve cells. And what they can do is they can divide. They can go through mitosis so that we can make more. And then they can become osteoblasts. So think about it. When you're growing, the bones are going to have to get longer. Well, we got to have cells to do that. The bones are going to get wider. We're going to have cells to do that. And this is where all those cells come from. They come from these stem cells, these osteogenic cells. And so these create more cells. So there are 4 types of cells in bone. And here are those 4 types. Here's that stem cell right here. It's going to divide and make more osteocyte or osteoblasts. And then we're going to osteoblasts are the ones that are going to build the bone. When they get trapped in the bone, they're going to become osteocytes and maintain it. And then here are those osteoclasts, which are going to destroy it and remove it. So if we look at them, see if I can find the picture I was using before. So when we look at somewhere this. So here are the 4 types of cells. So there's our stem cell. And so it's going to divide and make more cells. And then some of those cells are going to become osteoblasts. And they're going to build bone. And as they build bone, they're going to get trapped inside. And so they're going to become osteocytes. And look, here's their arms, and they're holding hands right here so they can pass materials from one cell to the other. And then the 4th type of cell is this one that removes the bone, osteoclast. So 4 types of cells we find in bone. Does everybody understand what each of these do and what each of these, why they're called their things and what they do? What do osteoprogenitor cells do? What do osteoblasts do? What do osteocytes do? This is the way you can self-quiz, figure out what's going on. Does it make sense? You should also be able to recognize them. So there's osteoblasts, there's osteocytes, there's osteoclasts. Any questions? So again, 4 types. So here's a nice little summary slide. Shows you what they look like. Tells you some stuff about them. So Johannan says only osteoclasts are multinucleated. That's exactly right. So what are these cells? Osteo what? Osteocytes. And we go on, we can see there's the osteoclast. And yes, see how many nuclei they have? They have a bunch of them, which is odd. Most cells don't have more than 1 nucleus, but this one does. Any questions? Okay, well, let's look a little bit more at what bone looks like. And let's look at the dense bone or compact bone first. So if you look at dense bone or compact bone under a microscope, it looks like this. And we've seen this already. So remember, it looks like a bunch of trees that have been cut down or stumps. So each one of these sort of trees or stump-like structures is the functional unit of bone, and it's called an osteon. Well, if you look in the center of every osteon, there's going to be a blood vessel there in a tunnel or a canal. So if we blow it up, they look like this. There's this central canal, which is where the blood vessel and nerves are. That's this right here. So look, you can see a little artery, a little vein, a little nerve. It's inside this central canal. And then if you look, what you see next is there are layers and layers and layers of bone around it, like rings of a tree. The layers are called lamellae. So they're layers of bone, and what it is collagen, and then it has minerals on it. So remember, the collagen makes it flexible, the minerals make it stiff and rigid and all that sort of stuff. Well, look at the direction these collagen fibers run. These are running like this. But the next layer, they're running like this. And the next layer, they're running like this. And that's because we need to be able to withstand tension or pressure in different directions. So because they run in different directions, we can withstand pressure in different directions. So it resists tension in different directions. It resists pressure, and so it makes the bone stronger than it would be if they all ran in the same direction. Here's the model that we were talking about earlier. Over here's our periosteum, and here's our endosteum. But this is the bone here. So if you look at this bone, you see these stump-like structures here, and there's a hole right there in the middle. Well, that hole is where these blood vessels are. So that's that central canal. And the central canals run up and down the bone. But there are also canals that run this way. Look, they run across, and they connect the blood vessels to each other. These are called perforating canals. So there's our central canal, and here's our lamellae that we just talked about. They look like the rings of a tree. You can see them on here, the rings of the tree, the lamellae. And in the model, look, they telescoped them out. So you could see what it looks like. It looks a little bit like a wedding cake. And over here, they put the fibers on it so you could see the direction the fibers run. Remember, they run in opposite directions on every one of these lamellae so that you resist tension in different directions. Another thing you can see is that we have little tiny spaces where the cells sit. And remember, those cells are called osteocytes. So if we go back and look, you can see these little spaces. That's what looks like the bugs. So these are those lacunae. And inside here is where the osteocytes would be. And remember, an osteocyte has arms that stick out. Well, they stick out through the bone. And you can see them here, these little arm-like structures. And what they're sticking through are little tiny canals. The little tiny canals are called canaliculi. Sounds like, can I lick your eye? But what it is are little tiny canals that these arms are going to stick through. And then remember, the cells are going to hold hands with each other. And they hold hands through these little tiny canals so that they can pass nutrients from a blood vessel, from this cell to this cell, and so on. And there you can see them here, these little tiny things. Those are the canaliculi. An easier place to see it is here, but that's what these are. These are those canaliculi. They look like this. You can also see them here. Not quite as well, but there they are right there as well. And here, these are the canaliculi. Here's where the blood vessels is, and that's called the central canal. It used to be called the Haversian canal. But that's a guy's name. And remember, we're trying to get away from naming things after people. So now they're called central canals. And so the central canals where the blood vessels and the nerves are, and there it is right there. Here would be the central canal. So there's a blood vessel right here. And then you see the central canal here, and then here are the layers. Those are the lamellae. Here are the little lacunae with the cells in it, and then here are the little canaliculi, and here's what the cells look like. And there you can see them holding hands through these little canaliculi. So if you look at it while it's alive, what we're going to see are lots of blood vessels, because every single canal has blood vessels in it and nerves. Remember, they're running up and down the length of the bone, but there are also these that run across that connect the central canals. Those are perforating canals. If you blow up a central canal, look, it looks like this. There's the blood vessels and the nerves. There's our endosteum that we just finished talking about right there. And then here's the lamellae. And then here's the cells. And then there's the little canaliculi. Make sense to everyone? There's the endosteum. There's our lamellae. And here are the cells. And these are the canaliculi. We also have these perforating canals, and they run across. So central canals run up and down the bone. The perforating canals run across the bone, and they connect the blood vessels in the central canals. So that would be this right here. These are perforating canals. And these are all central canals. And then if you look at spongy bone, remember spongy bone doesn't look like this. That's spongy bone. It looks nothing like this. And spongy bone has no osteons. So it's not going to have a central canal surrounded by lamellae, blood vessel and all that in there. It's not going to have that. There are no osteons because there are no central canals. When you look at them, though, they still have those other parts. They still have lamellae. There's the lamellae. They still have osteocytes and lacunae. They still have canaliculi. And there's our endosteum right there around it. So look, there's our osteoblasts, which are going to build bone. So these trabeculae can get thicker and bigger. And there's our osteoclasts, so you can dissolve bone. So these can get smaller and thinner. So we can change the size and the direction and so on of these trabeculae. We can make all kinds of adjustments. We can remodel these things. But there's no central canal. And if there's no central canal, then there's no osteons. The blood vessels here just weave their way around in between the trabeculae. They don't stay in a canal like they do here. We go back to the model. No, you can't see it in this picture. But if you look at the small end, you'd be able to see it. So the blood vessels just sort of weave their way in around here, or around these trabeculae like this. Any questions? Okay, well, remember you can always email me with questions at any time, but that's as far as we're going to go today, so we're going to stop there.